When Sega announced their departure from the console business and their shift to third-party development in January of 2001, it didn't take long for their games to show up on their biggest rivals' platforms. Choo Choo Rocket would be their first game to arrive on a Nintendo console, releasing for the Game Boy Advance on March 21st of that year, a full 10 days before Sega even pulled the plug on the Dreamcast. This would be followed by the likes of Super Monkey Ball for GameCube on September 14th, and Minna de Puyo Puyo, aka Puyo Pop, for Game Boy Advance on October 18th, before eventually releasing Sakura Wars GB2 Operation Thunderbolt for Game Boy Color on December 6th. Though obviously not the first Sega IP to appear on the system, Sakura Wars GB2 would be the first and only Game Boy Color game actually published by Sega themselves. The game would still be developed by Jupiter, just like the first one, but this time, Media Factory was out of the picture. You see, a few months after the release of Sakura Wars GB1, our old pal, Tetsu Kayama, would become a special advisor over at Sega in November 2000, and would eventually climb the ranks to become co-COO in February 2001, and full-on COO just a few months later in June 2001. So yeah, as if Sega going third-party wasn't enough, they were now being run by the Media Factory guy anyway. Sakura Wars GB2 would act as the opening salvo for what was an extremely busy month, if not the single busiest month in the entire Sakura Wars series. You had it on December 6th, followed by the simultaneous release of both versions of Sakura Wars Online on December 20th, and the theatrical release of Sakura Wars the movie a mere 2 days after that. That's not even counting the 2 Christmas dinner show concerts they held in Tokyo and Osaka late in the month, all while the cast were rehearsing for their next big stage show that would take place on January 2nd. That last one I'll actually touch upon a bit more once we reach Sakura Wars 4. You might hear all this and think this might have been a bit too much all at once, but even if there wasn't so much Sakura Wars content vying for the attention of fans that month, I don't think it would have helped GB2 much. The game sold a mere 11,494 copies in its first 4 days on the market, before careening off the sales charts entirely by the following week. No post-holiday bump or anything. That's what happens when you release a Game Boy Color game nearly 9 months after the GBA had already launched, and you put it up against the likes of Mario Advance 2 and Mega Man Battle Network 2. As a consequence of this commercial failure, Sakura Wars GB2 nowadays happens to be the priciest game in the series, as far as loose and standard boxed copies are concerned. Its special edition, meanwhile, isn't the most expensive, but it still fetches a high price all the same. A price it really doesn't earn. Look, there's a lot of special editions of the various Sakura Wars releases throughout the years, and they make for some stiff competition. Like, you've got the first game's limited edition on Saturn with its mouse and mousepad bundle, and Sakura Wars 3 on Dreamcast with your choice of either a portable Kinematron replica VMU or Chat Noir souvenir replica music box. The first GB is probably the most excessive of these, having no fewer than 9 special editions. There were 6 special themed sets based on each member of the Flower Division, the Pocket Sakura Combo Pack, the premium set that came with a stylish t-shirt, and the outrageously expensive Cherry Pink Game Boy Color bundle set. So, how did Sakura Wars GB2 follow that act? A generic black pouch with a Sakura Wars logo on it. Seriously, this might be one of the lousiest special editions I have ever seen for any game. Couldn't even give it a cool design or anything. You cannot convince me that this wasn't just an excuse to clear out unsold inventory of generic Game Boy pouches quickly and cheaply. As you can see, this game got dealt a rough hand in basically every conceivable fashion. It also didn't help that the wow factor of one of Sega's biggest franchises coming to a Nintendo system had long since faded after the first game's release, and that the first one was, frankly speaking, only okay at best. What makes this all doubly tragic, though, is that Sakura Wars GB2 is actually good. Very good, in fact. Despite being a sequel to Sakura Wars GB, even starring the same self-insert player character, GB2 is a wildly different beast. The last time around they attempted a rough facsimile of the console games, albeit with an emphasis on simulation and stat growth, but this time they opted for something completely new altogether, a dungeon crawler RPG. Whereas the first game had some rudimentary combat using multiple choice prompts and a heaping helping of RNG, this one has a robust battle system with multiple playable characters and a bevy of customization options. Even though they're ostensibly part of the same sub-series, they couldn't possibly be more different. According to an interview in Dorimaga, the game's director, Shunichi Ii, detailed that since its inception, the GB sub-series was always meant to explore the world of Sakura Wars through multiple distinct game genres. This time around though, series creator Oji Hiroi laid down a few ground rules for the sequel. The player had to be given the choice between a male and female self-insert, Orihime and Reni had to be there from the get-go, and the game had to have an actual story. As such, the only logical answer to these terms was an RPG, a genre that just so happened to be going through a renaissance of sorts on the Game Boy thanks to the success of Pokémon. It all made sense on paper, and it worked sublimely in execution, but due to the circumstances of its release, it got totally ignored, and is nowadays largely forgotten by anyone who isn't already a fan of the series. Even then, attempts to get a fan translation going haven't gotten any real traction either. In the end, I can only hope I managed to pique some interest in this game with this video, because I feel it really deserves a second chance. I'll be summarizing the plot and major events as usual, but given the game's primary focus on dungeon crawling and combat, I won't be nearly as exhaustive as I usually am. You're not going to be missing anything particularly important by me opting for the Cliff Notes of the Cliff Notes. Still, there will be spoilers if you care, so proceed accordingly. We start the game by entering a name and, as hinted at earlier, picking between playing as a boy or a girl. This choice is surprisingly impactful, as it alters dialogue and certain item rewards throughout the game. Some conversations play out completely differently based on which one you picked, lending the game a little bit of replay value. After a brief prologue covering the ending of the first Sakura Wars and the establishment of the Mikasa Memorial Park, the site of the first Mikasa's wreckage after crashing into Seima Castle, we arrive at the Grand Imperial Theater. Kaede soon fills us in that we've been called in to help with investigating the park following reports of strange occurrences there. She introduces us to Captain Ichiro Ogami, where we're given yet another choice to establish our backstory. We can choose to either be a totally fresh face, with the boy hailing from the Imperial Naval Academy and the girl from the Maidens Academy previously mentioned in Sakura Wars 2, or we can resume playing as the cadet from GB1. You can still select the latter option even when playing as a girl, even though the first game only ever let you play as a boy, so you could interpret this as either being a minor retcon or, hey, congrats on the transition. As you introduce and or reintroduce yourself to the various members of the Flower Division, you'll notice how much more colorful the game is compared to the prior entry. The characters have actual skin tones instead of plain white with colored shading, not to mention a greater level of detail in general. At first glance, it's a more impressive looking game than the first one, which was already great for the hardware. Before long, the alarm blares out and everyone rushes to the command center. Kaede informs the team that a huge spike in spirit power has been detected at Mikasa Memorial Park, with the source of the surge coming from the wreckage of the Mikasa itself, meaning it's time to finally get this investigation underway. However, due to the unclear nature of this phenomenon, we're not deploying the entire squad. Instead, opting to send a scouting team consisting of you and one other teammate, with this being the main party structure for the rest of the game. Most chapters limit you to a pool of 3 characters to pick from, but for this first chapter, Ogami's the only choice, and thus the 2 of you airdrop onto the Mikasa and begin to explore it. It doesn't take long at all before the 2 of you run into a pair of Wakiji on the deck and engage in your very first fight. Battles in this game play out using a turn-based system where each character takes their turn once a little meter has filled up. Not unlike the ATB system from some of the older Final Fantasy games. Unlike the traditional brand of ATB though, you can see the gauges of your enemies as well. Also, with traditional ATB, even after a party member's gauge has filled up, the enemies can still smack you over the head if you're taking too long to make up your mind. Here though, all the other gauges are paused once a party member or enemy fills theirs up, giving you all the time in the world to plan your attack during your turn. You'll definitely appreciate this extra time too, because you have enemy positioning and the environment to consider as you strategize. The enemy side of the field is laid out on an invisible grid, and what row and or column an enemy is positioned on will affect what options you can use to fight it. Enemies in the front row can be hit with close range attacks, while enemies in the middle need at least a mid-range attack to reach, and the back row requires long-range attacks. And all this presupposes you've got a clear line of sight. If one enemy is in front of the other, you can only attack the frontmost one, unless you use specific skills to go around or pierce through them. You may also occasionally find environmental objects on the enemy side of the field, such as rocks for the enemy to hide behind, or steam stands that will heal them. Not all of these objects are necessarily beneficial to the enemy though, as you'll sometimes find explosive barrels that can be detonated to damage every enemy on the field, so long as they're not a fire type. Whenever the frontmost row of enemies or environmental objects is wiped out, the rest of the rows will scoot up closer, bringing them in range for shorter range attacks. The pseudo-ATB system and these grid-based field mechanics make for a super solid foundation for this game's many fights. Battles feel more dynamic and multi-dimensional than many similar turn-based RPG battle systems of its era, without overcomplicating things or making the random encounters drag on for too long, at least for most of the game. Of course, that's not all there is to this game's combat. As for how you actually engage with these fights, that all depends on your Kobu's build. And here is where the true meat of this game lies. Unlike in GB1, you finally get a mech of your very own, with the boy having a light blue Kobukai, and the girl having an orange one. Sorry, but pink's been taken twice over already. You have full control over the weapons and skills your mech is kitted out with. Though you're limited to a sword and gun to begin with, as the game progresses, you'll keep unlocking new equipment types with different stats and attack ranges, such as spears, hammers, greatswords, etc. All of which are kept in the theater's hangar until you choose to take them with you. You can equip one weapon to each hand, such as a sword in your right hand and a gun in your left, but some weapons like the greatsword require both hands to wield. On top of that, each weapon comes with its own set of skills, and you can equip up to 2 or 3 of these skills depending on the weapon, so it'll behoove you to bring multiple different weapons with different skills equipped to better take advantage of any given situation. Thankfully, you can bring as many weapons as you want with you and swap them out whenever, including in the middle of battle at the cost of using up that turn, so long as you've got the inventory space for it. Show of hands, who here likes Resident Evil 4? Who here likes the attaché case in that game? Well, I've got some good news for you, because this game's got it too! Your entire inventory is one giant grid, with each item taking up multiple spaces on that grid in different amounts and configurations. And just like in RE4, it's immensely satisfying to organize everything just right to hold as many items as you possibly can. The only downside is that, unlike RE4, you can't rotate any of the items, so you'll often run into situations where you could totally fill up those last few spaces if you could just tilt that sword just a smidge to the right. But yeah, that's already a pretty decent amount of customization options to start with, but there's even more substantial ones that don't become available until a bit later, so I'll leave it at that for now. As for the other members of the Flower Division, their weapon types are preset, and they come equipped with unique skills, such as Ogami having the shield command, plus they all get to use their familiar super moves as well. You also have the Captain command system from the main games, but this time around, you can set different commands between yourself and your fellow party member. At the end of any given battle, you gain XP, as you'd expect, but thankfully, your partner will always be at the same level as you, so you don't have to constantly juggle your party members around to ensure nobody's falling behind. That said, there is one factor that further alters the stats of your party members on a truly individual basis: your trust level. As you'd expect from a Sakura Wars game, you'll often be given a multiple-choice lips prompt during a conversation, where picking an answer a character likes will increase your trust with them. In the main games, this would mean they get a boost to attack, defense, and speed for the duration of the chapter, only to have it reset by the time the next chapter rolls around. In this game, however, every boost in trust level instead increases that character's HP and MP, and this effect lasts throughout the entire game. As such, even though the other characters will always be the same level as you, there's still an incentive to get on the good side of the ones you like the most. One other way it differs from how trust works in the other games is that you can never decrease your trust level with other characters. Even if you say something they clearly aren't thrilled to hear, rest assured, the worst outcome is neutral. They won't suffer any stat penalties for it. It's a decent attempt at integrating lips prompts into a traditional RPG format, and though they're less impactful compared to how they work in the main games, the effects do add up over time. All told, a noble effort. Once you and Ogami take care of the two Wakiji on the deck, Ogami realizes this situation might be more than any of them bargained for. He's immediately proven right when, upon stepping through the whole door, they run into a civilian, who goes on to tell the team he was quite literally magically whisked away to the Mikasa wreckage. Though it's not yet clear why this has happened, he's not the only one either, and will be spending the rest of the game rescuing these civilians. Not all the civilians you can rescue are total randos though, as plenty of familiar faces show up as well. Ogata, Yamaguchi, Percy Howard, the fortune teller from the radio in Sakura Wars 2. Hell, remember that monkey and his trainer from Sakura Wars 1? Even they show up! Everyone is here! The monkey's name is Kantaro, by the way. Usually just finding and talking to these characters is enough to rescue them, but a good chunk of them have prerequisites. The most common of these is that some characters require specific party members to be in your team before they'll even appear. For instance, Orihime needs to be in your party before Ogata will show up and become rescuable. Others will only let you rescue them after you've already rescued another specific character, such as the monkey trainer, who refuses to leave until you found until you found Kantaro first. Your reward for rescuing them varies, with some civilians giving you a unique item that will trigger a conversation with a specific Flower Division member upon returning to base, while other civilians might instead recover your health or MP, and some will even grant you substantial upgrades and customization options. Rescuing each and every civilian in the game will unlock a secret bonus reward, but I'll wait until near the end before talking about that. You and Ogami make your way deeper into the Mikasa, fighting demonic enemies and rescuing civilians along the way, until the two of you eventually stumble upon none other than Tsubaki, being accosted by some Wakiji. You make quick work of them, and Tsubaki reveals that she too was magically whisked away here, saying she suddenly found herself aboard the battleship following a bright white flash. Chapter 2 then opens with the team at a total loss as to why the Mikasa's become a hotbed for all these bizarre occurrences. It's then that Yuri remembers a crucial detail: the Majinki. Remember how Satan stole all the Majinki in order to raise Yamato and Seima Castle in Sakura Wars 1, and how the review just had them all again in Sakura Wars 2, despite there not really being any time they could have retrieved them before Yamato went back under? Well, addressing that minor plot hole is what this whole game is all about. Koran theorizes that the demons have been drawn to the Mikasa by the Majinki's influence, and that the immense spirit power radiating from the Majinki caused a warp in space-time, resulting in the teleportation of random people such as Tsubaki. Now it's up to you and your recon team to continue investigating to either prove this theory right or uncover the truth, as Kaede gives you the order to retrieve the Majinki, and Operation Thunderbolt is officially a go. Starting from this chapter, you get to pick one of 3 potential characters to be your fellow party member, with the available characters rotating with each chapter, and pick an area to explore, with each chapter adding a new zone. In addition to the aforementioned civilians who will only show up when a specific character is with you, you'll also run into unique events that only trigger when bringing a specific character to a specific area. It's a smart incentive to keep switching between different characters and giving them all an honest try, instead of sticking to just one per chapter. The party makes their way deeper into the Mikasa, and after reactivating the power in the ship and getting into mild hijinks with the mini Wakiji, they find themselves in a part of the ship coated in ice. They soon stumble upon Kikunojo Oka of the Rose Division, trapped smack in the middle of a traditional RPG sliding puzzle. Once you, eventually, rescue him, he reveals that after having found the sword Majinki, he got attacked by demons. As he tried to escape, the whole area got frozen in a flash, leaving him trapped. They all return to base, where we learn the entire Rose Division's been sent down in advance to help find the Majinki. Remember, protecting the Majinki is their job, even though nobody's supposed to actually know that yet. The game takes place sometime in late summer, judging by everyone's attire, and judging by how, at this point in time, Saki's nowhere to be found, but Orihime still hates her dad. Meanwhile, the Rose Division's true purpose is only divulged during the coup d'etat attempt later in November. Not to mention, they shouldn't even be at the theater in the first place if the review didn't already have the Majinki back and needed them to be guarded. So, a lot of this doesn't really add up. Unfortunately, in attempting to cover up the plot hole about how the Majinki came back in Sakura Wars 2, This game introduces a handful of tinier plot holes while doing so. Oh, and I might as well get this out of the way now, but if you thought this game was going to handle the Rose Division any better than Sakura Wars 2, you're in for a rude awakening. Anyhow, Chapter 3. We have to trudge through more ice, but as a consequence of turning the power back on, the fans throughout the ship have kicked on, making a ventilation shaft we need to cross completely impassable. We do what anyone would do when faced with this kind of dilemma, and sort through a massive pile of garbage to find something that could be of any use.
Put this in a plastic bag and boom, yeah. Shower radio, buddy. Whoa.
We eventually uncover a set of tank treads, which proves not only to be the key to progressing forward, but our introduction to the next gameplay feature I want to discuss: mech customization. There are 3 main components to your mech that you can swap around back at the theater's hangar: your left arm, your right arm, and your main chassis. The arms you can swap out for either Gatling guns or giant punching fists, both of which need to be unlocked first before you can use them. They're stronger than any of the individual weapons of the same type, and they come with most of the same skills from those weapon types. You can even double up on these arm types if you want, which in effect doubles up the amount of skills for that weapon you can equip at any given time. For example, doubling up on Gatling gun arms lets you equip nearly every gun skill at once without compromising inventory space like you would if you were to bring both individual guns. However, the trade-off for these weapon arms is that you can't equip any weapons to these arms. You can't hold a sword with those Gatling gun arms, and two-handed weapons are off the table completely until you get back to base and swap back to 2 normal arms. Other than that, there's the main chassis, which primarily affects your stats. The first alternative we get is the Kobu tank, which Koran whips up for us when we bring her back the tank treads we plucked from the trash. It's a lot slower than the regular Kobukai body, but boasts much higher defense. You know, like some kind of tank. It also comes with a unique ability that none of the other chassis options get: the 80mm tank round, which deals huge damage but has a very limited number of uses that can only be recharged by returning to base. Finally, the other body option you get is the Eisenkleid, which prioritizes spirit power attacks over physical ones. You have to work harder to get it than any of the other parts, but depending on your choice of build, it might be worth your while. All in all, the amount of customization possible in this game feels fantastic. With all the different weapon types, arm types, and body types, there's a ton of potential combinations that you can use. It might not be on the level of something like an Armored Core or Front Mission, but for a turn-based RPG on the Game Boy Color, it's immensely refreshing, adding a ton of variety, flexibility, and possibility to the game's progression, a level of malleability you didn't really see in its contemporaries on the handheld. With the Kobu tank chassis at our disposal, getting past the fans proves to be a snap, and before long, we find the sword Majinki encased in ice. Following a quick trip to reactivate the ship's boiler, just as we're about to reclaim the sword, a very grumpy demon stomps out, wondering where all the ice is gone. This is the Sword King, the first real boss in the game, tasked with guarding the sword Majinki from would-be do-gooders. Sword Lord here doesn't feel particularly inclined to tell us whose orders he's following, so there's nothing left to do but take the Majinki back by force. This being the first boss, he's not terribly difficult, but he's got 2 Gunner Wakiji standing right behind him, and he's so huge he obstructs direct shots at them. Out of the 3 selectable characters in this chapter, if Orihime's in your party, she can easily deal with the dudes in the back. Once they're out of your hair, focus your fire on the big guy, and before long, he's gone. The sword Majinki is safely recovered, and now, confronted with the possibility that the other 2 are also being held by high-level demons, we press onward into Chapter 4. This time, in addition to whichever of the 3 characters you bring with you, Iris and Kanna tag along as a secondary recon group. As you all descend an absurdly long staircase, you're interrupted by a loud bang. It's then revealed that Kanna got fed up and jumped all the way down the stairwell, with Iris closely following behind, resulting in the 2 teams being separated. Naturally, it doesn't take long before Yuri reports that both Kanna and Iris have stopped responding, and that you'll need to rescue them from whatever bind they've doubtlessly found themselves in. To make matters worse, we've reached the lowest depths of the Mikasa wreckage, and the path forward is totally flooded. You can only spend a certain amount of time in the water before the inside of your mech floods, though thankfully, time spent in battles doesn't count, and even if time does run out, you won't get a game over. It'll just kick you back to the start of the flooded area. One minor nitpick I'll mention here, though, is that even though Maria is one of the party members you can bring along with you in this chapter, she's totally unfazed by the idea of her Kobu flooding. despite not knowing how to swim, as we learned in Sakura Wars 2. Chalk it up to character growth, I guess. We eventually catch up to Iris and Kana, who've been laid low by a powerful demon. Not only does this dude hit fairly hard, but he's got a steam stand on the field that will continuously heal him, and he consistently keeps summoning ads to chip away at your health and draw your fire. Do whatever you can to get rid of the steam stand as quickly as possible, or else this fight's going to drag on for a long time. The demon is eventually defeated, and his death triggers an explosion, blowing open a whole hole in the ship's hull. Surprisingly enough, though, the room doesn't start flooding. On the contrary, it's bone dry out there. That's because we've reached Satan's old stomping grounds, the lost continent of Yamato. We didn't wind up finding any of the other Majinki on the Mikasa, so we've got no choice but to trek onwards towards Seima Castle as we enter Chapter 5. For this chapter, we can pick between Sumire, Orihime, or Reni. However, not long after we touch ground on Yamato, we're caught up in a landslide and separated. As we come to, a demon finds our ally and makes off with them, which means, and try to contain your shock here, Orihime and Reni can get captured again.
Again.
Thankfully, they didn't get too far ahead, and you can catch up to them just as they're about to be cooked whole, mech and all, in a giant cartoonish pot. After dispatching the demon in a rather unremarkable fight, you rescue your captive of choice, who theorizes this could have been part of a larger ceremony, and you continue along your way. As you get deeper into Yamato, the cool purples of the cold rock gradually give way to hot glowing reds, in one of the more visually striking areas in the game, until you eventually reach the bubbling pits of magma far below. There you eventually come upon the second AWOL member of the Rose Division, Yokihiko Ota, who's trapped in some sort of energy prison. Thankfully, all it takes to rescue him is a sliding statue puzzle, one that took me longer to complete than I'd really care to admit, but he's now back at base, safe and sound. He explains he's found zero trace of the other two Majinki throughout Yamato, meaning the only place left they could be is within Seima Castle. Thus begins Chapter 6, as we mosey on up to a familiar sight, the entrance of Seima Castle. After dealing with a mid-boss fight right off the bat against a pesky gatekeeper and his minions, we make our way inside, where we find two identical towers. The western tower is sealed shut with a suspicious statue above the door, so we have no choice but to explore the eastern tower. During our expedition, we find a swanky rooftop pool. Demons need a little R&R too, you know? As well as a statue similar to the one before, only this time holding a funky doohickey. As you likely guessed, this doohickey is, in fact, the doohickey to the western tower. And not long after we gain access, we find the Jewel Majinki. The trouble is, it's behind a whole sea of flames, making approach nearly impossible. That's when our hero rubs his two brain cells together and realizes that, since these two towers are identical, this one should also have a rooftop pool. Thus we tear the roof off the sucker and send a whole lot of water going down, extinguishing the flames. As we clamber down to retrieve the prize, who else should show up but the second proper boss, dubbed Jewel King. As he talks some mad shit at us, he lets slip a mention of a King of the Demon Realm, but refuses to elaborate, instead opting to make us carry the secret to the grave. And so, the fight begins. And let me tell you, this one's quite the difficulty spike if you're not prepared. It took me several attempts to pin this one down. This rotund asshole can perform 3 actions per turn, such as attacking, healing, and summoning these little fireballs that'll take pot shots at you all the while. It's a pure DPS race as you try to whittle his health down while he absolutely tears you to shreds, using up all your recovery items in the process. What wound up working for me was bringing Iris along and having her focus on healing, while also attacking the boss directly with her ranged psychic attacks. Before long, we bust his ball and reclaim our orb, making 2 out of the 3 Majinki safely secured. As we enter Chapter 7, the mood is tense as we ponder the significance of the so-called King of the Demon Realm, but we have no choice but to delve deeper into enemy territory. This time we're trudging through the tower's dungeon, as in like the actual holding cells. The place is full of civilian captives ready to be rescued, as well as an equal amount of demonic imposters waiting to ambush us. Also, whereas most of the game uses 8-bit covers of Sakura Wars 1 and 2 songs, this area features, best as I can tell, an all-original track. And, boy can you tell this is not a Kohei Tanaka cut. It wants to be Lavender Town so bad, but it just sucks. As we rescue or ignore the prisoners accordingly, we stumble upon several conspicuous items, all of the cosmetic variety. Haven't got the faintest idea who they could possibly belong to, but nevertheless, we've got to help them. After the game ambushes us with a combination block-pushing ice-sliding puzzle for us to bumble our way through, we find none other than Rose Division Captain Kotone Seiryuin. As soon as we approach, though, he becomes surrounded by the statues we just finished pushing around on the ice, and they begin to attack. You'll have to pick your attacks carefully as you fight off the demons without hitting Kotone smack in the middle. The one in the back is particularly tricky to hit safely if you're not prepared. The statue at the bottom has a tendency to cast speed buffs on the rest of the statues too, though they thankfully also apply to Kotone, who in turn uses them to help out during this fight. However minimally. Oh shit, he actually did it. Once the crumbled statue dust has settled, Kotone reveals that he has indeed found the mirror Majinki, but before he could secure it, it quite literally walked away, as the next demonic guardian had already fused with it. And so we give chase, finally making our way into Seima Castle proper and into Chapter 8. Early on in this chapter, we find yet another totally flooded area. If you were thorough about rescuing every civilian in Chapter 4, you should have the Aqualung item by now, which lets you stay underwater indefinitely. If you don't, then go back and get it, because this area is a colossal pain in the ass without it, as the layout here makes it easy to get lost and waste time. There's also a side quest here where you can help Kayama get his guitar back from the demons after he dropped it in the water. There's no real reward for it besides a bonus conversation later on, but still, I'd be remiss to ignore our boy. Anyway, we eventually come upon what could basically be described as a hall of mirrors, only here, all the mirrors want to kill you. Get too close to any one of them and a demon will pop out, locking you into battle. I should probably mention that this chapter is when the battles start to kinda drag a bit, since most of the enemies get really damage spongy and take a lot longer to kill, whether it be due to huge HP counts, too many type resistances, or obnoxious healing gimmicks. That's what makes avoiding these mirrors imperative. If the demons don't kill you, then the fucking ravages of time will. Once we make our way to the end, we find a giant mirror facing us. As we take the time to admire the craftsmanship, the lights go out, and once they turn back on, we're greeted with a sudden personnel redundancy as our chosen partner's now been doubled. Both of them claim to be the real one, so in true Saturday morning cartoon fashion, we solve this problem by simply mentioning the name of the real one's favorite food. Predictably, this is enough to make them freak out, thereby exposing which one of them is the fraud. The faker drops the act and reveals himself to be the Mirror King, final guardian of the stolen Majinki. During our pre-battle banter, we discover the true aim of the demons: to use the Majinki's power to summon the previously mentioned King of the Demon Realm so that he may plunge the world into darkness. With that, the battle begins, and once again, this is yet another considerable difficulty spike. Now, try to act surprised, but this boss's gimmick is to reflect all of your spirit power attacks back at you. Though thankfully, melee and gun skills are still safe. As if that wasn't enough though, he'll also pelt you with debuffs and elemental attacks of his own, all of which add up very quickly and can easily lead to a sudden game over. I'm gonna be real, I beat this one by bringing Ogami along and having him tank a shitload of hits for me with the shield command while I wailed on the boss with a big ass hammer and Ogami kept using his super. Probably not the intended solution, but fuck it, a win's a win. Once defeated, Mirror King mutters something ominously cryptic before biting the dust, and once we've stepped through the looking glass, we recover the final Majinki. Mission accomplished. Now that all three of the Majinki have been recovered, it's time to celebrate. During which, depending on the key items you've found throughout your adventure, you have the chance to gain a bunch of trust points with all the other characters. The festive mood grinds to a halt as the blaring of the alarm cuts through the commotion, and it's all hands on deck once more as the final chapter kicks off. The Wind Division reports that seismic activity has been detected near the site of the Mikasa, with a spike in spirit power readings coming from deep underground. Looks like we're not finished just yet, so back down we go. Before you head off though, Kaede hands you the 3 Majinki, thinking they'll be the key to ending this crisis once and for all. For this final chapter, you're no longer limited to the pre-selected set of 3 characters to pick from, but instead, the entire cast. Naturally, we're sticking with Koran for the rest of the game going forward, though I'm just going to let you know right away that whoever you pick has minimal effect on the game's ending. We are still squarely in the friend zone after all. Together, we enter the utmost depths of Seima Castle, which is this weird, otherworldly, fleshy area covered in veins and strange pustules. It's not a terribly big area either, so only a few screens into it do we get the first of our endgame bosses. Or should I say, first 3, because the 3 kings have returned, ready to take the Majinki back by force. They fuse together to create this freakish thing, and it's a bit of a bastard. It can attack multiple times per turn using all the skills of their individual incarnations, heal itself, and take away all of your buffs. A fair amount of your time is going to be spent healing, but thankfully, one of Koran's skills will grant you HP regen, which significantly reduces the pressure and lets you focus more on dealing damage. I definitely recommend bringing the Kobu tank chassis because, damn, those 80mm shells put in the work. Once the 3 kings have been dealt with once and for all, a civilian runs up to you and gives you the lowdown on what exactly is going on. The demons use the Majinki to open the gate to the demon realm, with its king lying in wait on the other side. All those random civilians who were teleported to the Mikasa and Seima Castle were summoned to be sacrificed as an offering to him upon his arrival. The man then gives you his camera as thanks and goes on his way. And, provided you've been thorough up to this point, he marks the final civilian you can rescue. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what's our big reward for rescuing them all? Some powerful new weapon? A secret ending? A little horn for your Kobu that plays La Cucaracha when you honk it? The answer is none of the above. Think back for a second to my video on the first Sakura Wars GB. As you may recall, that game had content that was originally totally inaccessible without the use of a peripheral that never actually made it to market. You see where I'm going with this? Well, sure enough, they took the secret bromides of Orihime and Reni and stuck them into this game as your big reward for rescuing every single civilian. You're tracked down by none other than Minister Yamaguchi, who gives you 2 bromides from his private collection as his little way of saying thanks for your service. Yeah, this is honestly pretty underwhelming. I get it, it makes sense for them to reuse these CGs nobody ever got to see and put them somewhere where people can actually access it, but, like, that's it? Sure, in the main games, exclusive CGs were your reward for meeting certain milestones and high scores and such, but there's a difference between adventure games like those and a full-fat RPG like this. You'd hope for secret equipment or an ultimate technique or something, but no such luck. Returning to the dungeon and continuing our final assault, we press on, passing what appears to be fossilized demons jutting out of the bedrock until we reach the gate. The doors are already partially opened, and there are 3 pedestals with grooves carved out for each of the Majinki. Before we can slot them in and use their power to shut that door, the gate opens completely, and from it emerges the talk of the town, the king of the demon realm himself. Before fighting us, though, he offers us a choice: to join him and help him conquer the human realm. Which we enthusiastically agree to. And thus, the world is plunged into darkness by our hand. The end. Nah, just kidding, but still, I had to. I love it when games give you that option and it actually results in something. We turn him down, obviously, and in retaliation, he sends his right hand after us.
Your right hand comes off?
No, that's like actually the name of the penultimate boss, this giant mass of monster muscle. Tempting though it is to use the 80mm shells on this dude too, remember that you can only restore those by going back to base, which at this point in the game we're unable to do, and you'll want to save those for the final boss, so hold off on that as much as you can. Instead, just cast buffs and wail on him with all you can muster while conserving your resources. Once you beat him, the king will return, and so we enter the final battle, And, as you might expect, this one's a real doozy. The final boss has a ton of HP, attacks like a zillion times per turn, often for about a third of your total HP, can heal himself, and can summon adds. Though these adds aren't terribly strong, they will still chip at your HP, and they can become a problem if Big Boss Man over here casts buffs on his side of the field. Now's the time to smoke him if you got him. Apply whatever buffs you can and spend all the MP and 80mm shells you've been saving up to apply all the hurt you can muster. Plus, if you're bringing Koran along like I am, there's one ability of hers that will really come in handy here. Her Chibi Robo. She'll summon one of the Chibi Robos from her super move from the first game onto the enemy's side of the field, where it'll act as a decoy while taking potshots at the enemy. What's most important, though, is that because the boss takes up all but 2 spaces on his side of the field, if you can fill up those spaces with a Chibi Robo and one of the decoy items, you'll completely prevent him from summoning adds. Plus, most of the attacks he uses target your party specifically and bypass decoys, so neither are in any real danger of getting destroyed. But wait, there's more. Whatever buffs the boss casts on his side of the field will also apply to the Chibi Robo, making it an actually great source of consistent additional damage per turn. With both the Chibi Robo and her HP regen skills at her disposal, Koran is an insanely good choice of party member for this final battle, as if there was ever any doubt that she was the best. The battle is nonetheless grueling, but eventually, the King of the Demon Realm is defeated. Though not before he turns into a corncob and screams that he's not owned, pledging to one day return. Without a moment to spare, we scramble to place all the Majinki on the pedestals, and through their power, the door to the Demon Realm is sealed once more. Though the scope of this mission spiraled wildly out of control, we've nonetheless succeeded, as we collect the Majinki and head back to base, leaving Yamato behind us forever. At the theater, everyone gives us a hearty congratulations, and Kaede officially declares Operation Thunderbolt complete. The party member you fought the final boss with, in our case Koran, reminds us of the camera the final civilian gave us, and we decide to take a group photo, but as we set the timer and rush back over to the group, as I'm sure you noticed, the story in this game isn't anything to really write home about. Though it has its moments, there's no great narrative thrust, no themes or anything to work with. It's your standard filler story, pure function over form, existing only to justify the framework of the RPG gameplay and clarifying a minor plot hole as to how the Majinki got reclaimed between games. Even then, its attempt to clarify that arguable inconsistency isn't entirely successful either, as it doesn't quite fit into the established canon all that well, raising more questions in its attempt to provide answers. All that said though, nobody was really playing this for the story. They were playing it for the dungeon crawling, for the combat, for the customization, for the banter, and it's great on all those counts. It doesn't push the technical envelope nearly as hard as GB1 did, what with its connectivity features and voice acting and all that, but it's a much meatier, richer game for it. It has an engaging combat system that plays with well-worn RPG gameplay conventions, weaving in some of the main game's defining mechanics in interesting ways. Of all the Sakura Wars games, I feel as though this is easily one of the most neglected and forgotten of them all. Even more so than any of the random fan discs on Saturn or Dreamcast. Like, only the typing games on PC are more obscure. It really deserves better, both within the context of the series itself and the greater overall Game Boy Color library. It's not only a fun bit of fan service for the Sakura Wars faithful, it's also a great RPG in its own right, one that will hopefully get far more recognition as time goes on. Of course, this was only the beginning of a very busy month for the series, as up next was the series' first foray into the realm of online gaming. Though, perhaps not in the way you might expect.